Hello YouTubers, welcome to Big Buddha is Watching. I'm Big Buddha and today we're on to Red Dwarf 5, Red Dwarf Series 5. So I'll be looking at that today. For those of you who want to see my thoughts on Timewave, Series 12 Episode 3, then just skip forward to the last 5 minutes of the video where I'll give you my first initial thoughts on that. But the bulk of the video today will be on Series 5. Just to prove that I am a regular fan. Well, more than a regular fanatic, really. A few more things that I should have shown you in my life as a Red Dwarf fan video, but completely forgot. But very apt as we've got up to Series 5 now. That's, of course, I dug these out of the cellars just 5 minutes. The cellar about 5 minutes ago. These are my VHS tapes. There we go. A bit of old school fandom there. Series 5. In the old days, you had to buy. I probably paid like $13.99 or something for these. Way back in the 90s. 3 whole episodes on one VHS tape, so, and the best part of £25 now. No wonder there's no money in TV anymore. I say that that's apt because I did own Series 1 to 8 entirely on VHS at one point. Series 1 to 4 I don't seem to have anymore. I think they might have gone to a car boot sale at some point. But series, I've just had a look now, and series 5, 6, 7 and 8 I still do own on VHS, and then from Back to Earth onwards it was all, DVDs and Blu-rays from then on. I guess I started getting rid of them when I made the transfer to DVD because, I mean, you get all the episodes and much more of an overall package with the DVDs, special features and what have you. But for a while, I think I probably at some point have taped every episode off television as well. But God knows where those are. They would be a real find, my original recordings. Not that I actually own a video player anymore, so I have no way of playing them, and they have been down in the cellar now for 6 or 7 years. They've probably completely disintegrated now, but glad I own them. They are real museum pieces. I'll just very briefly, because I wish I'd have remembered actually and dug these out. I did mention them when I made my Life as a Red Dwarf fan video, but I've also just found Smeg-ups and Smeg-outs. This was the better VHS. I mean, it was a stocking filler one Christmas. This is really just the outtakes from series 4, 5 and 6, and then to cover all bases they did the ones from series 1, 2 and 3 as well, of which there weren't as many because they were just terrified, the cast, of messing up. So because they were under Peter Jackson's reign in the first couple of series, so a lot less. And this has much more filler material on it. This is things like footage of the fan convention and at least 3 versions of the tongue-tied video on it. Later these were repackaged as special features on the DVDs, so all bases are covered. I haven't actually watched these. This one's got links from Robert Llewellyn as Crichton. This one also has links from Robert Llewellyn, and Craig Charles makes an appearance as well. If you buy the Body Snatcher collection, I believe the links are all on there, so all bases are covered in there. And then again, I think when they did the Red Dwarf Night for the 20-year anniversary, I think back in '98, they repackaged a lot of these and recorded fresh links with with Chris Barry, Craig Charles and Robert Llewellyn. So only Danny John Jules didn't make an appearance that time. And I think all those links are available on the Body Snatcher collection. This one actually is so sparse on material, it actually has outtakes from the links from Robert Llewellyn doing the links on this video. That's how much filler there is on there. So, but anyway, 5 minutes in, got to talk about Series 5. So Series 5, a divisive series really. It's a lot of people's favourites, and there are some classic episodes in here. Never really been my favourite, I'll be honest. Not my least favourite by any stretch, but you know, if I had to rank favourite series, I think I'd rank 2, 3, and 6 over this one. The simple reason being that, like Series 4, you know, this feels very much a continuation of Series 3 and 4. You know, that we have the initial 5 crew. You know, if you include Holly and Crichton, you know, the same look is retained with Mel Bibby's sets, the same costume design. So the Series 3, 4, and 5 very much feel like one continuous stream. What really kind of lets this down for me a little is, whereas I find that the previous series had found a very good balance between the comedy and the sci-fi, and the science fiction is always a thing that's drawn me into Red Dwarf. Although I do think it's a very funny series as well. This one feels more heavily like it lent towards the science fiction, and it probably floundered a little on the comedy. You know, the sci-fi is as great, it's as sharp as ever. There's some concepts, there's some you know, nods to really great works of science fiction in here, and great original stories as well, and themes. But I just get the sense that they didn't really, they kind of run out of steam a little when it came to writing the jokes. A lot of the episodes sort of fall flat a little towards the end. You know, traditionally towards the end they need like what they call a woofer, you know, a final big gag to go out on, and these episodes felt a little lacking in the big woofer jokes towards the end. Back to Reality would be a prime example, which I just think for such a strong episode, it kind of ends on a very pithy line like, "Come on out, Crichton, no one likes a smart aleck android." So you know, it was really a change had to come, and a big change did come in Series 6, which really gave the series a new lease of life, at least in that series. So the writing on the walls really in Series 5. Go on then. That's half my videos that letting that little bleeder in and out. He'll be back in a second. What was I saying? Yeah, it was really a do or die series. In fact, there was even talk that this could possibly be the final series for 2 reasons. One, with it ending on Back to Reality, which could have served as a very worthy final episode for the series. Also, and this is included on the special features here, also between Series 5 and Series 6, Rob Grant and Doug Naylor went to America to do the ill-fated Red Dwarf pilot. And you know, a US remake, which sort of famously went nowhere. It's a much maligned program, the pilot. You know, it's like fans are still up in arms to this day about how awful it is. But I mean, my answer to that is, I mean, yes, it's not very good. You've been asleep for 3 million years, Dave. My baseball cards must be worth a fortune. That kind of translation of jokes. Interestingly enough, the showrunner, if that had been picked up, the showrunner would have been Linwood Boomer, who would later go on to do Malcolm in the Middle, a much better program, if you ask me. But yeah, I'm not as critical of the pilots as a lot of people are, for the simple fact that it is just a pilot. I think I would have been much more critical of it if it had gone to series on the strength of the pilot. But that's why you make pilots, to see what works and what doesn't, and that they made the show and saw it didn't work, and so it never got commissioned. So I'd have been far less happy had that show got picked up and they'd done that one season or 13 episodes of a not very good US version. Because who knows, we may have not got series 6 if that had happened. The only holdover from the British cast was Robert Llewellyn, who went over to make the pilot as well. He's the only he played Crichton in the pilot. All the other characters were recast. Interesting enough, the American counterparts to Chris Barry and Craig Charles were also called Chris and Craig. Craig Bierko was quite good as Lister. A much different take. He's far more in the sort of Friends mould than Danny John Jules says the ideal choice for the American Lister is John Belushi. I don't know. In 1992, how that would have worked? He'd have been dead for a decade even then. He was pretty good as Lister. Jane Leaves, who would later go on to play Daphne in Frasier, plays Holly, and Linson Battle, the dancer, plays Kat. He's probably most famous for being in the demon in the musical episode of Buffy. Disappointingly, that's not on the actual pilot itself. Isn't on the DVD because of rights issues. But you can find a sort of shady version of it very easily on YouTube. Believe me. But there is a pretty good documentary about the making of the pilot if you're so inclined to watch. But yes, sorry. I had to just address the pilot because it's a big part of the Red Dwarf stories, the doomed US pilot and what could have been. So series 5. So let's look at the episodes. So episode 1 is Hollow Ship. That's where the crew encounter a ship that's manned entirely by holograms. This is a pretty good guest cast that includes Jane Horrocks, who would later go on to play Bubble in Absolutely Fabulous. It's an okay episode and not one of my favourites. There's a very funny scene of them watching a soppy movie at the start, and a good joke about Kat not realising that the cartoon at the start, which is the only part of the film he liked, was not actually part of the same film. That's a dated joke now because you don't really get the cartoons at the start of movies anymore. It's an okay opener. The Inquisitor is episode 2. This has the third and to date final appearance by one of the cast members from the sketch show Absolutely, the other being Gordon Kennedy from The Last Day and Morwenna Banks from Stasis Leak. Not a lot of people realise it's Jack Doherty, who would later go on to have his own chat show very briefly in the early days of Channel 5. Pretty good science fiction concept. It's about a mechanoid who traverses time looking for the unworthy souls, and there's a very good section where the dwarf cast the characters have to justify their own existence in order to not be expunged from history. And when a kind of funny concept is Lister and Crichton are the ones who are chosen to be expunged, but when they're expunged they are replaced by the sperm, well in Lister's case the sperm that never made it to the egg. So he meets his replacement, and he goes, "Well, so we're kind of sperms-in-law," and there's some very gross out sections. There's a bit where the Crichton and Lister, the alternate versions, both get wiped out, and Lister has to use the severed hand of his counterpart to open a door. Good. I mean, a very original, imaginative concept. Almost good enough to make a whole film out of, or at least a pretty good episode of Doctor Who, actually. And I mean, it's sort of tonally owes something to the Terminator. Maybe not the funniest episode. But a good action sci-fi episode, definitely. Episode 3 is Terraformed. Now, this is where the series really did come up with what an episode, if you ask me, that's worthy of the earlier series. In fact, he's probably one of the best, actually, of all the episodes to date. Certainly the most epic in scale. It involves, it's a very funny concept, but a very imaginative science fiction concept of Rimmer landing on a terraforming planet, but it terraforms to the psyche of the inhabitant on it. So it essentially becomes, the whole planet becomes Rimmer's psyche. There's there's frogs that really useless. There's gravestones made up in his honour to all aspects of his personality that are now dead. Honour, chivalry, bravery, and towards the end of the episode, is one of our favourite scenes is where they get stuck in a swamp. Oh yeah, there's also just to backtrack. There's an episode where he's chained up and oiled by these two Valkyrie maidens, and because he's going to be fed to the guilt monster, and you can see Chris Barry's obviously been down the gym in preparation for this scene, because it's a shirtless scene and he's trussed up, and looks. Didn't look half bad in his time, Chris Barry, with his shirt off. But there's towards the end of the episode, they get stuck in a swamp and they have to uplift Rimmer's spirits. So they all the crew sort of try and bond with him, and okay, homeboys, let's posse. You get that scene, and then my favourite scene in the episode is when his spirits are uplift, his honour and chivalry raised from the ground, and they appear as two musketeers to vanquish the guilt monster. And Chris Barry's one of our finest comic actors, and he really has a field day whenever he's asked to play anything outside of Rimmer, and he has a field day playing these two sort of yieldy-wieldy chivalrous types. A very good episode. Quarantine owes a small debt, I'd say, to Marooned, in that it's essentially a character building episode, or at least the middle section of it is. It basically revolves around, this time, Kat, Crichton and Lister in quarantine, but they because they possibly come in contact with a virus, and now it's Kat and Crichton's turn for a bit of character development within this scene. But unlike Maroon, sort of bookmarking this episode is a very strong sci-fi idea about Rimmer contracting a hollow virus, and other sorts of viruses being implemented to counteract the situation. In particular, a luck virus that when you take it, you instantly become the luckiest person in the world. So there's a very good scene of Lister who's been injected with the luck virus, and they have to find some components to counteract to hack Rimmer's hologrammatic projection in order to counteract him, because he goes mad towards the end of the episode, and because of Lister's got the luck virus, he's just happens to find all the bits, the components to put them together. Little microchip. What a piece of luck. Now, interesting to note this episode is Chris Barry's portrayal of Rimmer when he goes mad. The voice he uses, because I believe he actually reused the same voice when he did Timewave, which I will be looking at the end of the video. But I'll get onto that. But a pretty solid episode. It's kind of a sci-fi horror episode. It's very creepy in the early parts. Done really well. I forgot to mention actually that this is the first series that wasn't directed by Ed Bye. This series was directed in part by Juliet May, who halfway through the series decided it wasn't for her, because to direct Red Dwarf, it's not like doing a conventional sitcom. You also have to have quite a good understanding of science fiction conventions, and not nerdy conventions, but the conventions of science fiction and special effects, and she just didn't have that background. So actually Rob Grant and Doug Naylor actually took over the directing partway through the series, which led to a lot of complications and reshoots later on in the shoot. But this is at least until series Back to Reality, and from when Doug Naylor's been the director of the series, this is probably the closest tonally to what Rob Grant and Doug Naylor imagined the series to be. Episode 5 is Demons and Angels, which is another great episode, really. I've been critical of this series because as I say, the tonally, like the comedy is kind of hit and miss throughout the series, but when it in episodes like Terraform and in Demons and Angels, where when this series hits, it really hits the mark well. Probably the best it has ever done in the history of the show up until this point. Demons and Angels is a fine episode, very, very funny, got some great set pieces in, but it's the basic plot is that Crichton reformats the matter paddle from Meltdown, which took them to the wax world, to duplicate things. But when it duplicates things, it extracts all the good from one and all the evil from the other. He reverses the flow, but it accidentally ends up blowing Red Dwarf. But when it does, it replaces it with two alternate versions of Red Dwarf. One, a good one, which is essentially manned by versions of the crew who are essentially peace-loving hippies, and an evil one, so one that has all the worst aspects of the crew. And the most fun sections of this episode are seeing the low versions of the crew. Cat's a feral animal, Lister's a hissing cowboy, very, very scuzzy type. Crichton's a greasy version of himself, and of course the most fun version of this episode is seeing Rimmer, who for some reason is essentially Frankenfurter from the Rocky Horror Show. I'll say no more. Very good episode. But the pinnacle of the series is obviously episode 6, and possibly the pinnacle of the series as a whole. One of the finest episodes they ever did, Back to Reality, which they filmed first, and they turned out to be a very strong episode, despite initial reservations that on the night that they shot it, that they didn't think it worked. They didn't think it was very funny. When they edited it together, they found out it was a very strong episode, and initially it was going to be the series opener, and it would have been a much stronger series opener than Hollow Ship, definitely. But then they hit upon the idea of actually putting Back to Reality at the end of the series, because it would for a second fool people into thinking that it was the final episode. The reason being that the plot of this episode basically revolves around the crew essentially crashing in Starbug and getting killed, but then waking up and finding out that Red Dwarf was in fact just a computer game, an artificial reality computer game that they'd been playing for 4 years and had no memory of, because they were so immersed in their characters. They believed they really were their characters, and playing very badly, of course, only scoring 4%, and not realizing that like Rimmer was only meant to be a prat in the early part of the game, but then realizing that following the clues and finding out that he was supposed to be essentially the hero of the game, so playing the game very badly, and then gradually finding out that the crew were in the real world. They live in a fascist society where Lister's basically a fascist leader, and he's actually the half brother of Rimmer, Lenny Doyle. And a couple of noteworthy cast members of this, of course, Timothy Spall and Lenny Van Dolen, who's from Twin Peaks, one of Rob Grant's favourite programmes. Very fine episode, lots of great comic set pieces in this. The car chase at the end, of course, it turns out to all be a dream in the end. I'd say that Back to Reality is really the pinnacle of the series. If you want to see the finest episode, and indeed it has regularly been voted the best episode in the series, and rightfully so. It's a classic. So much in this series that I'm missing all sorts, Mr. Flibble from Quarantine, Rimmer's hand puppet. Funny enough, having reviewed it now, my opinion of it is definitely growing. I say when it hits its stride, it really is a good series. Series 5. It really is. There's some really fine episodes and fine moments in this. It's just a personal thing. I'd personally watch 2, 3, 4, and 6 over series 5. I think, but that's for its flaws. I think that those are personally my favourites. Whereas, but that's not to take away from the fact that there are some fine moments and fine episodes to series 5. It's just a shame that they couldn't maintain the level of comedy that I think that they set up in the first few series. But not the worst series by any stretch of the imagination, definitely not. So that's my thoughts on series 5. I'll just briefly talk about Timewave, which I watched last night. It will be broadcast next week on Dave. I had to go back and double check, because this episode is called Timewave, but the Timewave only appears in the first few minutes of the episode as a way to set up a 24th century ship appearing in the episode. This is this initially had confused me because I kind of let it slide a little in Cured that there was a human character in that. I thought, okay, we abandoned the concept of Lister being the last human alive. Are they just now humans scattered throughout the galaxy? Has that fallen by the wayside? But this episode involves the crew encountering a whole ship of humans. Of course, when I double checked, I realised, okay, the Timewave was just a way of explaining they're actually from the 24th century. They've just been thrown out into deep space 3 million years later. So the Timewave episode is really set up and abandoned very quickly. This really involves the crew encountering a ship where criticism has been made illegal. This is one of the more philosophical episodes. I'm starting to wonder has Doug Naylor been reading Incompetence by Rob Grant, because I thought there was a few holdovers from that novel that he may have drawn on. In particular, the concept of a society where people are just useless at their jobs, which is alluded to a little in this episode. I thought, okay, but drawing on your former partner's work there, a little Mr. Naylor, or is that just a coincidence? Chris, I'm gonna. This has a guest appearance by Johnny Vegas in it. Chris Barry has some good moments in this series. Chris Barry's been really good, really strong this season, I think. He has his standout moments in this is where he plays Rimmer's inner critic in very he looks a little like Donald Pleasance's Blofeld, a very scarred face, and again the voice I think is from the insane Rimmer from series 5, but a standout performance from Chris Barry in this episode. But Johnny John Jules, of course, has all the best lines, in particular the Lieutenant Asshole line. On the whole, it was kind of a weaker concept for an episode from Siliconia and from Cured, I think. It had some laughs early on. The Coffee on My Love Spuds scene, the Planet Rimmer and Sunny Rimmer scene, but definitely the weakest of the three so far. But there you go, there's just some initial thoughts. So I'm going to wrap this video up now. Thanks for joining me once again, folks, and join me next week when I'll be looking at Series 6 and Series 7, and of course the next episode of Series 12. But until then, folks, this is me, Big Buddha, signing off, and I shall see you all out there in YouTube land.